So now we'll actually look at creating a report for the first time. So again, using the menus, the little data steps up the top, we've had a look at dashboard and browse. So now we're going to have a look, we have our create option. So today we're only going to look at reports, but again, if we wanted to do other types of content, dashboards, storyboards, for example, this is where we would go through to create them. So I'm just going to hit create report. Whenever we create a report or a storyboard or a dashboard, we need to actually say what we want to create that off. What is the data or the view that we want to write this report off? So you'll be presented with a series of views, which you can then say, oh, I'd like to write my report off student HSC or student demographics. And as I said, in this instance, we're just going to work off the National Student Census. Okay, and then we get presented with our report canvas. And just having a quick look there, we've got our canvas, our blank canvas here in the middle. We have columns and rows, so we can bring in data into columns and rows or both. We have the option to add filters in the middle here and sections, which we'll have a quick look at the end of today's session. And then over on the left is the data or the dimensions and the metrics that are available to you from the National Student Census view. So your metrics are the measurable items, how many students, for example, the student head count or the SWD count, whereas the dimensions are the where or the what, the who or the why, so what campus or what school, for example. So you'll see that your dimensions, they appear as with a yellow square, and your metrics appear with a blue circle, just to differentiate the two types. So, okay, so now we're just going to basically create a very simple report just to show you how we would build a report. So I'm going to add in the census year. So there's a couple of ways. I can just drag this straight onto the canvas and it'll put it into the columns by default. Then when I go and get the next column that I'm interested in, which is the year level, I again could drag that next to that on the canvas, or I can drag it up the top there. There's no difference there really. It's probably just a personal choice which way you prefer to build it. But once you get to perhaps a crosstab style report, which we'll look at, then you will need to add your dimensions and metrics in up here usually. So I'll just add my year level description in, and I also want the gender description. So at the moment I've only brought in dimensions. I haven't got anything to measure all this information by. So the last piece I want to bring in is the student head count, so I can actually start getting some value out of what I've put on here. So all I have here now is by year, by the year level, and by the gender, what the student head count is. I haven't brought in campus or school. Obviously that would add a bit more value. But again, keeping in mind, this is just to demonstrate how you would go about creating a report, how you're adding your columns to that canvas. Okay, so maybe that's all you want, and now you're looking around thinking, well, where's the save menu? Where's the file save? I mean, we don't have that here in CD3. It's actually sitting under the report menu. So whenever you want to save your report, you need to go to the report menu, and under there you'll find save. And then I need to give it a name, so I'm just going to, as I go through today, call these DC training reports. And one thing that's easy to overlook is where you actually save your reports. So we save them into content categories, very similar to folders. We save them into content categories, so make sure you go through and you look at where you're actually saving this. So if you were doing this report off student census, you would probably want to pick the student census folder if that makes sense to save it, but you may have your own folder created. So today I'm just going to save these into a training folder, and I've created another content category. As a note there, if you needed more content categories created, your tenant admin would have to set those up for you. So if you wanted to create some specific folders, you'd need to speak to them about setting those up for you. Okay, we then, depending on your level of access, have the ability to make this public or private. I want to make it public so people can see it, or this is for my viewing only and I can set it to private. So I'm just going to leave that as public today. And then we activate when we're ready. We do have the option, if we're not quite finished or we're not quite ready, to share that out to put it into draft mode. But for today, I'm just going to activate that report so that it's saved and it's ready for consumption. So again, very basic, very simple example. That's how we would create a report and how we would actually save it. The next thing I want to sort of show you how to do is how to actually copy a report. So we publish a lot of reports out there. They're in the CNET specific folders, and you can't actually edit those, but you can copy those if you needed to have a look at perhaps how did we do something, or I like that report and I want to make it similar. So again, using the report menu, you have the option of copying a report. And once you copy a report, it'll essentially take a new copy, give it a new name, which means you're not going to break or wreck or destroy the original version, and you can make the changes you need to this. So I can show you before we go any further. It's called a VC training report 1 and put copy on it. And when we go to activate this after we make our changes, we obviously then can give it a more meaningful name and save it wherever we would like. So I'm just going to make a couple of changes to this report. So I've got this report. I've decided I no longer need some of the fields, some of the dimensions that are in here. So I can just drag them back off, drag them out of the column. So I'm just going to remove year level and gender. So I'm just dragging them back over to the left-hand side. That's one way we can remove those. Now, what we're going to have a look at here is how we actually would create a calculated field. So the information, you want to do something else to the information you have there. It's not necessarily a dimensional metric that's currently available in the folders here. But we can use the little plus button down the bottom here to create our own calculated fields. So it's a very basic example, but I'm going to take the student headcount that we had, and I'm going to say, I want to look at forecasting headcount. We need to maybe grow it by 5%, so I'm going to create a forecasted headcount, student headcount. So we need to give our calculation a name, so I'm just going to call it student headcount, and actually I'll call it forecasted headcount. And then we have our builder here, if you like, where we build the formula, we build the calculation. So this big rectangular space here is not free text. You can't just type in there student headcount times 5. It's controlled by all of the different aggregations, the different fields and the different syntaxes and that are available to you down here. So again, this will be quite a simple one, but we want to actually times the student headcount. So I'm just going to search for that field, student headcount, and it adds it into my formula builder here. And I want to multiply it, so we're just using the multiplication. And about the only time you actually ever type anything is when you're doing it in the box here. And you have to remember to hit add, otherwise it won't go in there. So I hit add. So a very simple calculation to look at a forecasted student headcount. We can validate that to make sure that the syntax is okay, and it will tell us there if it is or not. So we've got a tick here, the SQL is valid. So once we're happy with that, we hit save. And now what you should see over here is a new folder appear. It's red, called calculated fields. And there's our new calculation there. So I can now just drag that column in, as I did with any of my other columns before. And I've now added that to my report. Now, something that we haven't done yet to that calculation is apply any aggregation to it. What are we actually going to do? Are we going to sum that? Are we going to average it, for example? So I need to apply aggregation to this new column. So using the little arrow, so we can format our columns. Again, we'll have a little bit more look at formatting. But using the little arrow next to the column there, it'll come up and I get a number of options. So I can apply aggregation to this field, and I'll hit sum. And now you can see that makes a little bit more sense. I've got my current head count, and as I said, it's a very simple example, but a forecasted head count. Okay, you can see when you actually apply aggregation to your fields, it will usually put the word or the aggregation type in front of the heading, which is not really ideal. It's not what you want to display. So again, coming back to the options that we have in terms of formatting our fields, again, using the little arrow next to the column, we can go format and edit, and now I can give it the name I really want. So I'm going to take the word sum off, and I don't really want any decimals on this. I just like it to be a whole number, so I'm going to get rid of my decimals. So you can see, if I just scroll through here slowly, we have options. If we're dealing with percentages, we could add the percentage sign, for example, as a suffix. We can decide whether we want the comma in our numbers, so 1024 with a comma. So this is just where you can do your basic formatting on the dimensions and the fields in your column. You can go in and to the data, and we can change the font style, for example, to be red, and we can make it smaller, and I could center that data. So fairly common concepts about changing font and that, but again, just knowing where you would do that. So that is all available to you in the format. So, and then I might just go back and show you that. So format and edit, and then you'll see we talked about having large crosses and little crosses. The large cross is going to close me out of the report. The little cross is just going to close that sub-menu. So I'm sure at some point you're all going to accidentally hit the big cross. Your report is always in draft mode, and you don't lose it. It will create a draft version. You wouldn't lose it. So if you accidentally close it, you'll be able to go back in, continue working with your report, and then activate it properly. So just keeping in mind, though, big cross, little cross. The little cross is for the sub-menu that we're in right now. Okay, and then you can see that little bit of formatting I applied has taken effect. Now, sometimes it doesn't always, it hasn't picked up my decimals, has it? No, it has. That's all fine. Or, no, it didn't. Format, edit. Maybe I need to actually specify 0. So sometimes you actually got to put 0 in rather than just null it out. And then if I look at my output, you can see that the decimals are gone. So sometimes when you're working in the report, it doesn't always reflect the change you just made. But if you go and have a look at it in the output view, you'll see if that change has taken effect. And as you can see now, I'm back in the data view that has refreshed and removed my decimal places.
Yeah, if it doesn't refresh, you can also click the bottom right-hand corner on the refresh report,
Down,
which manually does it for you too.
Just down the bottom there, refresh report. Okay, what I want to do is create another calculated field. So we have our current head count, we have a forecasted head count. Now I want to, well, how many do I need to make up that difference? So just creating another type of calculation. So create your calculated field. We'll give it a name, so students required. And this time, so I talked about we needed to apply the aggregation to that column in our report. We can actually build that aggregation in to the calculation now rather than when we come back out and putting it on. So I'm going to put a sum. I want to take my forecasted head count, so I'll just search for that in there. And I'm going to subtract student head count. It very much leads you where you need to go. If I try and save that now or validate that, it will tell me what the error is, like the brackets do not match. I can see looking here, the only options I really have that they're bolded are one of these. So I know I'm missing a bracket here. So the formula builder here very much leads you down the next logical step in your formula if you're doing a case statement and expecting a when. So always just have a look at that and making sure you just finish off your formula correctly. And if I validate that now, it says it's happy with that. So I can save that. We've got a second calculated field available now. So I'm just going to add that over to my report. And again, I can format. So you can format your fields also from the top up here, again using the little arrow. Very much the same. I have the arrow there, format, or you can work from up the top there. You get the same options there, format. So I'm just going to format the field. Students required. I want 0 decimal places. And again, as I said, you can go and play with the type of data. You might make that smaller again. Might make this one green just for the sake of it. And again, little cross. And there's the. Okay, so just some basic formatting, but just so you know, if you look at that, and their concepts we'll cover later in these sessions, is things like conditional formatting sit in here, advanced functions, totals. So their concepts we'll look at down the track, but that is where you have the ability to format your fields in your report. Okay, so I'm just going to save that report as is. That'll become, as I said, it's still got the word copy on it because we took a copy of the report, so I'll give it a proper name. Just check where I'm saving that. That's fine, it's in the content categories I'd like, and I'll hit activate. So that report is finished. So I'm going to copy this again, and we're just going to have a quick look at how we remove. So I mentioned earlier we can remove fields by dragging them out of our report like that. We can also do the same with calculated columns. So let's have a look, what am I going to do here? Delete the cat. So if I now no longer need the students required field in my report, I can actually delete it altogether, coming into the folder there, selecting the little arrow next to students required, and I can hit delete. So that's how you can remove those. You may have a number of calculations and you want to clean it up, and it gets a little bit confusing if you've got all these other ones there that you're not using, so you can delete them like that, and that will remove that. If you expand your folder again, they're no longer there in the calculated fields. And as I said, if we didn't need forecasted headcount anymore, we can drag it back off the report like that, and we're just back to having the 2 columns on our report. So that's how you can move data on and off. What we're going to do now, I will leave that column on there, is taking that report, we're just going to have a look at how would I create a chart off this report. So we've been working with our data, and we can now go and build a chart based on the data that's sitting in there. So we always need data to create a chart. We can't create the chart without having something in the data. So we'll go into our charts. So by default, you'll get an auto chart by default. It may look at the data you have and think, I think this will be the best chart for this type of data, but we can change the chart type. We have select chart type here, so just under the little arrow we can select chart type, and you can see over here everything that is not grayed out is available to us based on the type of data we have in our report. So we have a number of different types of charts available to us. You can also change the chart type rather than from here. Over on the right hand side it looks like a little pie chart, and it'll bring up the same menu, but again just knowing where the different features of the tool are. So now what we need to do is bring the data that we created into our chart. So I'm going to put census year into my horizontal axis and the student headcount into the vertical. And it'll now go and create a simple column chart showing you enrolment by year. And as you can see, so that's just this very simple chart, but being able to turn that data into something visual. I could change this chart then to be, maybe I'm thinking, yeah, that's not the best representation of that data. I'll make it a line chart. And now I get the line chart there. So that's just very simply how you can go and create a chart, change the chart types. If you're wondering, that drop off there is because we've only had census data submitted by one diocese for this year so far. So it looks a bit funny there, but that's more what that's all about. As I touched on before, once you've built your data or your table, or now your chart, we can go have a look at how that's going to appear to us as the final, how's our output looking? So the output is including both our chart and our data. We can resize, so little blue arrow or triangle in the corner, we can resize our chart, we can make it wider, taller, longer if we wanted, so that visually it works depending on whether you're displaying that on a dashboard or just using a report. So I'm just resizing that using the little arrow. You can decide whether you would like that to just be displayed as a chart and table, so we can turn the table off and this just becomes a line chart, and that table's, we haven't got rid of the table, we're just not displaying it. So there's that option there with the green tick. So I'm just going to save that out. Okay, take a copy of that one. Alright, so far everything we've been doing has been going down the page. We've just had columns, so it's essentially just like a list report with columns down the page. But you may want to do what we call a crosstab. So we can bring data into the rows as well and essentially like pivot that data if you like. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to remove the forecasted headcount out of this report. And I'm going to bring gender back in, like we may have had it earlier. I'm going to bring gender. So this is where I need to put it. If I put it here on the canvas, it's just going to add it to my columns. So I would like to put this into my rows. And you'll just get a warning message saying you're now going to change the way you present your data to a crosstab. That's okay. We'll just say okay to that. So now we have a different way of looking at that data in the table where we've got a crosstab. So we've got the gender by year and the enrollment numbers by year. So this will also give us options to use different charts or to do something different in our charting that perhaps just a column list couldn't do before. As you can see in here, the metric makes up the body of the report now. So it's a bit like pivoting your data in Excel, I guess, where you've got your rows and your columns and your metrics in the middle in the cells. So if I go back to the charts, you can see there's probably a lot more grayed out now, indicating that there's only certain types of charts that will work with a crosstab style report. So again, just that'll always give you an idea of what types of charting you can do, or if you had a chart in mind and your data's a crosstab, you may have to look at it, doing it differently if you really want to work with a specific style of chart. Okay, so I'm going to change this to be, so if you hover over, you can see down in the bottom there, pops up with the name of the chart. So we've got the different styles of column charts, layered column, just the vertical. So I'm going to pick a stacked vertical column this time. And then I need to go and bring in the data into my horizontal and vertical axes again. So I want the census year on the horizontal, and the student headcount on the vertical. This time I can bring in a color or a series if you like. So on that chart, I want to split, I want to know, looking at the headcount, what is female and what is male. So I'm going to bring in the gender description into the color. And you can see now on that, I'm getting a chart that shows me, you've got your little, you've got your, oh, I've lost the word. Legend, thank you, down the bottom telling you the blue is the male, female, and the grey is the male. So again, just by using a crosstab and then the different styles of charts, how we can then visually display that data. Okay, so that's, again, we could spend a couple of days doing charting alone. This is really just touching the surface just to show you where the charting is, the types of charts available, and how you would build that chart, bringing in your data. And again, we can go to our output page, and I can resize if I'd like, make that a little bit smaller, or maybe I think that needs to be a bit wider, and I've got just that ability to just change the size of it a little bit. Okay, so we'll save that one out.